The afternoon sun filtered through the vintage lace curtains of timeless threads, casting golden patterns across the carefully curated racks of clothing. Elena Martinez stood behind the mahogany counter she'd restored herself, watching customers browse through decades of fashion history she'd lovingly collected. 8 years of 12-hour days, of hunting through estate sales and building relationships with suppliers, of transforming a rundown storefront into the most sought-after vintage boutique in the city. Mrs. Martinez, do you have this dress in a size 8? A young woman held up a 1960s mod dress, her eyes bright with excitement. Elena smiled, the familiar warmth of helping someone find their perfect piece spreading through her chest. Let me check the back room for you. As she turned toward the storage area, voices drifted from the narrow alley behind her shop. The window was cracked open to let in the spring air, and she recognized the voices immediately. Marcus, her husband of 10 years, and his older brother David. Getting Elena out of the picture won't be as hard as you think. David's gravelly voice carried through the glass. Elena froze, her hand on the doorknob to the back room. The customer waited patiently, but Elena's world had suddenly tilted sideways. The lawyers said marriage laws are tricky, but there are ways, Marcus replied, his tone cold and calculating, nothing like the warm voice he used when he kissed her goodbye each morning. Especially if we can prove she's unstable, bad with money. I've already started with the suppliers, David continued, told Morrison's that she's been late on payments, that you're concerned about her mental state. They're starting to ask questions. Elena's breath caught in her throat. Morrison's Textiles had been her most reliable supplier for 6 years. Last week they'd seemed oddly distant when she'd called to place her usual order. In the bank records? Marcus asked. Easy enough when you have access to her accounts. A few transferred payments here and there, some delayed deposits, creates a pattern of financial irresponsibility. The customer cleared her throat softly, and Elena realized she'd been standing motionless for several minutes. With shaking hands, she managed to retrieve the dress from the back room, her movements mechanical. Here you are, she managed, her voice barely steady. As the customer tried on the dress, Elena's mind raced. The missed payments David mentioned. She'd assumed they were clerical errors. The strange looks from longtime suppliers, the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room. It hadn't been paranoia after all. Through the window, Marcus's voice continued. She thinks this place makes her so independent, so successful. She has no idea that without me, she's nothing. This shop should have been mine from the beginning. The venom in her husband's voice hit Elena like a physical blow. For 8 years she'd believed Marcus supported her dreams. He'd celebrated her successes, or so she'd thought. Now she understood the truth. Every achievement had been a threat to him. Every milestone a reminder of what he saw as his own failures. The customer purchased the dress and left with a cheerful goodbye, oblivious to the fact that Elena's world was crumbling behind her professional smile. As the door chimed shut, Elena sank into the vintage velvet chair by the window, her hands trembling. Her own husband, the man who'd promised to love and support her, had been systematically destroying everything she'd built. And his brother, who'd borrowed money from her countless times, who'd eaten at her table and accepted her help, was orchestrating her downfall. But Elena Martinez hadn't built a successful business by crumbling at the first sign of trouble. As the shock began to fade, something else took its place, a cold, determined fury that would serve her well in the days to come. Over the next 3 days, Elena moved through her life like an actress playing a role. She kissed Marcus goodbye each morning, served customers with her usual warmth, and smiled at David when he stopped by the shop. But beneath the surface, she was conducting the most important investigation of her life. The first piece of evidence came from her own computer. While Marcus showered, Elena accessed their shared email account and found a folder labeled Legal Consultation. Her hands trembled as she opened message after message between Marcus and a divorce attorney, discussing asset protection and business ownership dispute. The lawyers' responses were clinical and brutal. Given your wife's emotional instability regarding the business, we could argue for temporary management transfer during proceedings. Emotional instability. Elena's jaw clenched. She'd never been more stable in her life. The bank records told an even uglier story. David had been systematically intercepting her supplier payments, creating a paper trail of late and missed payments that existed only on doctored statements. Worse, she discovered he'd been using her business credit line to cover his own debts, forging her signature with practiced ease. But the most devastating revelation came from an audio recording on Marcus's phone. one he'd carelessly left on the kitchen counter. Elena's hands shook as she listened to a conversation between her husband and David from 2 weeks earlier. The beauty is, she trusts us completely. Marcus's voice crackled through the speaker. She actually thinks I'm proud of her little dress-up shop. Meanwhile, I've got 3 investors lined up. Who'll pay twice what the place is worth once we get her out. What about the staff? David asked. Already handled. I told Sarah and Michelle that Elena's been acting erratic, that we're worried about the shop's future. They're ready to jump ship the moment we offer them better positions. Elena's chest tightened. Sarah and Michelle, her 2 most trusted employees, women she'd mentored and supported through personal crises, their recent distance suddenly made perfect sense. The final blow came in a text thread she found between Marcus and someone named Jay Patterson. Wife still clueless, David's got the financial irregularities documented, should have her declared unfit to run the business within the month. Then timeless threads becomes our problem to solve. Elena screenshot everything, her movements precise and methodical. 8 years of marriage, and she'd never truly known the man sleeping beside her. The Marcus who brought her coffee in bed was the same man plotting her professional destruction. The David who'd borrowed money for his daughter's wedding was the same man systematically destroying her reputation. As she closed the laptop, Elena caught her reflection in the dark screen. Her face was pale, but her eyes held a steely determination that surprised even her. They thought she was naive, trusting, easily manipulated. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Elena's transformation began at 5 a.m. the next morning. While Marcus slept, she sat in her home office with 3 separate notebooks, mapping out her counteroffensive with the same meticulous attention she'd once used to source rare vintage pieces. The first call went to Patricia Chen, the most ruthless business attorney in the city, and conveniently a longtime customer who'd bought her wedding dress at Timeless Threads. 5 years earlier. Patricia, I need to discuss something confidential. Can you meet me today, Elena? Of course, you sound different. Are you all right? I will be. Patricia's office felt like a war room as Elena laid out printed emails, bank statements, and transcribed recordings across the mahogany conference table. The attorney's expression grew increasingly grim as she reviewed each piece of evidence. This is conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, and potentially criminal financial manipulation, Patricia said finally. Your husband and his brother have committed multiple felonies, but more importantly for your immediate situation, do you know the shop's actual legal ownership structure? Elena smiled for the first time in days. I do. The business is registered solely in my name. The property deed is also exclusively mine, bought with my inheritance from my grandmother. Marcus has no legal claim whatsoever. Then we have them. Over the following weeks, Elena executed her plan with surgical precision. She maintained her normal routine while secretly documenting every move Marcus and David made. She installed hidden cameras in her shop's back office and began wearing a discreet recording device during family dinners. The evidence mounted daily. David's forged signatures on supply orders. Marcus's meetings with potential investors who didn't know Elena existed. Late-night phone calls where her husband coached David on which lies to tell which suppliers. But Elena's masterstroke came through her network of loyal customers. Mrs. Henderson, a retired banking executive, helped Elena establish a shell corporation called Heritage Holdings LLC. Williams, a psychiatrist who'd been shopping at Timeless Threads for years, provided Elena with documentation of her excellent mental health. Even Tom Morrison from Morrison's Textiles, once David called him with concerns, reached out to Elena directly. Elena, I've been getting some strange calls about your business practices, Tom said during a carefully orchestrated coffee meeting. Doesn't sound like the woman who's never missed a payment in 6 years. Elena's network was stronger than Marcus and David had realized. While they'd focused on sabotaging her professional relationships, Elena had been building genuine connections based on trust and mutual respect. The pièce de résistance came when Elena discovered David's own financial records during a family barbecue. While everyone was outside, she photographed documents from his briefcase showing massive gambling debts and 3 failed business ventures. David wasn't just envious of her success, he was desperate. Elena also began quietly reaching out to her competitor. Sarah at Vintage Vogue, the shop across town, had always been collegial despite their business rivalry. I'm thinking of expanding my operations, Elena mentioned casually over lunch. Would you be interested in discussing a potential partnership? Sarah's eyes lit up. I've always admired your customer loyalty, Elena. They follow you like you're some kind of vintage goddess. Elena filed that information away. Customer loyalty. her secret weapon. By the end of the month, Elena had assembled a comprehensive dossier of evidence, secured legal counsel, established a backup business entity, and built a coalition of supporters who saw through Marcus and David's lies. She had 3 different exit strategies, 2 backup locations scouted, and a list of every customer's contact information safely stored in her personal cloud account. Most importantly, she'd discovered something about herself she'd never known. Betrayal had awakened a strategic brilliance she didn't know she possessed. Marcus thought her success threatened his masculinity, but he had no idea how formidable she could be when cornered. The trap was set. Now she just had to wait for them to walk into it. The performance began on a rainy Tuesday morning in October. Elena sat across from Marcus at their kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug, her face the picture of defeat. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice carefully modulated to sound broken. "The stress, the problems with suppliers, the financial issues. Maybe you and David are right. Maybe I'm not cut out for this." Marcus's eyes lit up with barely concealed triumph, though his voice remained sympathetic. "Honey, I hate seeing you struggle like this. What are you thinking?" "I want to sell timeless threads." Elena let her shoulders slump. "Just get out before I lose everything we've worked for." Within hours, David appeared at their door with a folder full of paperwork and a list of interested buyers he'd coincidentally already contacted. Elena played her part perfectly, the overwhelmed business owner grateful for their help. "We found a buyer willing to pay fair market value," David explained, his voice oozing false concern. "Heritage Holdings LLC. They specialize in retail acquisitions." Elena hid her smile. Heritage Holdings, her own shell corporation. The closing took place 3 weeks later in Patricia Chen's conference room. Elena sat at one end of the table, flanked by Marcus and David, while Patricia represented the mysterious buyer who was attending by phone. The brothers were practically vibrating with excitement as Elena signed document after document, officially transferring ownership of Timeless Threads. "The new owners would like to meet with you tomorrow morning," Patricia announced as the final papers were signed. "They have some immediate operational changes planned." Marcus and David exchanged victorious glances. They'd done it. They'd finally wrested control of Elena's precious shop. The next morning, Elena arrived at Timeless Threads to find Marcus and David already there, measuring spaces and discussing renovation plans with the casual entitlement of new owners. Sarah and Michelle stood awkwardly by the register, clearly uncomfortable but committed to their new allegiance. "The new management should be here any minute," Elena said quietly. At exactly 10 a.m., Patricia Chen walked through the door, followed by Detective Rodriguez from the Financial Crimes Unit and 2 officers from the District Attorney's Office. "Marcus Williams and David Williams," Detective Rodriguez announced. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, and identity theft." The color drained from both men's faces as the handcuffs came out. "What the hell is going on?" Marcus sputtered, looking frantically between Elena and Patricia. Elena stepped forward, her voice steady and cold. "I am Heritage Holdings LLC. I bought my own shop, and in the process of due diligence, I discovered extensive evidence of your fraud." She turned to Sarah and Michelle, who stood frozen in shock. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out you were feeding information to my husband, that you were helping him build a case for my instability?" Patricia opened a thick folder and began reading charges while the officers read their rights. Forged signatures on 17 different documents. Intercepted business payments totaling over 4. Conspiracy to defraud, identity theft. "You see," Elena continued, her voice gaining strength with each word, "while you were busy trying to destroy my reputation, I was building an ironclad case against you. Every conversation, every forged document, every lie you told, I documented it all." David's face had turned ashy. "Elena, please, we can work this out. I'll pay back every penny. The time for working things out was before you decided to steal from me." Elena replied, "Before my own husband decided I was too successful for his comfort." As the officers led Marcus and David away, Marcus turned back with desperate eyes. "Elena, 10 years of marriage has to count for something." Elena met his gaze without flinching. 10 years of lies counts for exactly this moment. The shop fell silent except for the gentle chime of the door closing behind them. Sarah and Michelle shifted uncomfortably, realizing their positions were no longer secure. "Ladies," Elena said, turning to address her former employees, "I think it's time we discussed your future." Unfortunately, they won't be here. Elena stood in the center of her reclaimed kingdom, surrounded by the vintage treasures she'd curated with love and expertise. Everything they'd tried to take from her was still hers, stronger than ever, and now completely, undeniably, legally protected. Phase 1 was complete, but Elena's revenge was just getting started. The war began 3 days after Marcus and David's arrest. Released on bail and facing financial ruin, they launched a desperate counteroffensive that only served to expose the true depth of their malice. It started with the anonymous reviews. Overnight, Timeless Threads' online ratings plummeted as fake accounts accused Elena of selling counterfeit items, overcharging customers, and running a scam operation. The reviews were clearly coordinated, posted within hours of each other using similar language patterns Elena recognized as David's writing style. Then came the supplier harassment. Marcus, using contacts from his sales job, began calling Elena's vendors with stories about unpaid debts and impending lawsuits. 3 suppliers temporarily suspended her accounts before Elena could provide documentation proving the claims were false. But their most vicious attack targeted Elena personally. David created fake social media profiles and began spreading rumors in local business circles that Elena had been embezzling from her own shop, that her arrest of Marcus and David was a cover-up for her own crimes. The lies were elaborate and seemingly credible to those who didn't know the full story. "They're trying to destroy you completely," Patricia warned during an emergency meeting. "This goes beyond desperation, this is scorched earth." Elena remained calm even as she watched her phone buzz with concerned messages from customers and friends. Let them dig their hole deeper. Every action they take is more evidence for the prosecution. The brothers' final gambit was their most brazen yet. Using David's remaining business connections, they attempted to launch a competing vintage shop directly across the street from Timeless Threads. The store, hastily named Classic Threads, opened with a massive banner reading "Under New Stable Management" and featured suspiciously familiar inventory. Elena stood at her shop window, watching customers cross the street to investigate the new competition. For a moment, doubt crept in. What if their plan actually worked? What if people believed their lies? Then her phone rang. It was Mrs. Henderson, the retired banking executive who'd helped establish Heritage Holdings. "Elena, dear, I hope you don't mind, but I've been making some calls. David Williams owes money to half the business community, and Marcus's reputation in sales circles, well, let's just say people remember when someone tries to sell them a bill of goods." Over the next hour, Elena received similar calls from Tom Morrison, Williams, Sarah from Vintage Vogue, and a dozen longtime customers. The network she'd spent 8 years building wasn't just loyal, it was actively working to protect her. The turning point came when Classic Threads' inventory was revealed to be stolen. Detective Rodriguez arrived with a warrant, discovering that many of the vintage pieces displayed across the street had been taken from Elena's storage unit using keys David had copied months earlier. The theft charges were added to their growing list of felonies. But Elena's masterstroke was yet to come. While Marcus and David had been focused on destroying her current business, Elena had been quietly preparing her Phoenix moment. She'd secured a lease on a larger space in the trendy arts district, hired a team of social media experts, and partnered with 3 other vintage dealers to create the city's first vintage collective. The grand opening of Timeless Collective was scheduled for the same weekend that Classic Threads closed permanently due to the theft investigation. Elena stood before a crowd of reporters, customers, and supporters, wearing a stunning 1940s emerald dress from her personal collection. Sometimes, she said, looking directly into the news cameras, "Betrayal teaches you who you really are. I thought I was just a shop owner. It turns out I'm an entrepreneur." The crowd erupted in applause as Elena cut the ribbon on her new venture, twice the size of her original shop, featuring 4 boutiques under one roof, and completely irrevocably hers. Marcus and David watched the coverage from David's dingy apartment, their dreams of owning her business replaced by the reality of pending criminal trials and civil lawsuits. They'd wanted to destroy Elena's success, but instead had catalyzed her greatest triumph. 6 months later, Elena stood in the bustling main floor of Timeless Collective, watching 4 different vintage boutiques serve a steady stream of customers. The space hummed with energy, laughter from the coffee corner, the rustle of fabric as customers browsed, the gentle chime of register sales that had tripled her original revenue. The legal proceedings had concluded with decisive victory. Marcus received 18 months in prison for fraud and conspiracy, while David faced 3 years for the theft charges and financial crimes. Their reputations in the business community were permanently destroyed, their names now synonymous with betrayal and incompetence. Marcus had sent letters from prison, desperate apologies, pleas for forgiveness, promises to change. Elena read the first few before deciding she had better ways to spend her time. The man who'd pledged to love and support her had revealed his true character when her success threatened his ego. There was nothing left to salvage from those ashes. But perhaps the most satisfying consequence was watching their carefully constructed lies crumble under scrutiny. The business community that David had tried to turn against Elena now shunned him completely. Marcus's former colleagues whispered about his unstable wife until the truth emerged, leaving him professionally radioactive. Elena had discovered something profound in the wreckage of her marriage. She'd been happier in the 6 months since Marcus's arrest than she'd been in years. Without his subtle undermining, his jealous comments, disguised as concern, his constant need to be the center of attention, she'd blossomed in ways she hadn't expected. Elena, a young woman, approached hesitantly, clutching a business plan and looking nervous. "I'm Jessica Chen, Patricia's niece," she said. "You might have time to talk about my jewelry business idea." Elena smiled, recognizing the familiar mixture of hope and terror in the woman's eyes. "Of course, let's sit in the cafe corner." This had become her favorite part of success, the mentoring. Every week, women approached her with dreams of their own businesses, inspired by her story of rising from betrayal to triumph. Elena had started hosting monthly workshops for female entrepreneurs, sharing not just business advice, but the hard-earned wisdom of trusting the right people and cutting ties with toxic influences. "The most important lesson I learned," Elena told Jessica over coffee, "is that true success isn't about proving yourself to people who don't believe in you. It's about surrounding yourself with people who celebrate your victories instead of plotting your downfall." Jessica nodded eagerly, scribbling notes. "And remember," Elena continued, glancing around at the thriving collective she'd built from the ashes of betrayal, "revenge might feel sweet in the moment, but building something beautiful with people who truly support you, that sweetness lasts forever." As the afternoon sun streamed through the large windows of Timeless Collective, casting golden light across her expanded empire, Elena Martinez realized she owed Marcus and David a debt of gratitude. Their betrayal had freed her from a marriage built on lies and revealed the strength she'd always possessed. Sometimes the best revenge wasn't revenge at all, it was simply living well.